My daughter-in-law gave my room away at the ladies' supper, but the quilt remembered whose house it was. My daughter-in-law gave my room away before the whole church supper, and the worst part was not that she had done it. The worst part was that every woman at the long table smiled as if she had done something merciful. It was the first Thursday of October, 1898, in Hallowell, Illinois, and the rain had turned the road outside St. Matthew's Hall into a brown ribbon of mud. The ladies had hung paper garlands from the rafters because the church roof fund was still $67 short, and every family in town had brought something to be sold or eaten or praised. There were oyster patties, pickled peaches, a ham glazed so handsomely that Mrs. Vale said it looked almost Episcopalian, and 3 pies from my own kitchen, though Clara had carried them in and received the compliments. I was sitting near the stove with a paper napkin folded in my lap, warming my hands around a cup of coffee that tasted of burned beans and tin. I had not meant to sit. I had meant to help. For 21 years I had helped at every supper, sewing circle, charity box, temperance tea, and Christmas basket, since my husband Elias put our name on the church roll. But Clara had touched my sleeve the moment we entered and said, softly enough for kindness and loudly enough for witnesses, "Mother Mercer, you must not wear yourself thin tonight. Sit by the stove. Everyone understands." Everyone did understand. That was the trouble. They understood the story Clara had been telling them for months. Poor Mrs. Mercer was failing. Poor Mrs. Mercer forgot the sugar. Poor Mrs. Mercer took too long on the stairs. Poor Mrs. Mercer had done enough in her day and ought to be rested now. Then, just after the minister blessed the collection basket and before the auction of embroidered towels, Clara stood beside the coffee urn in her dove-grey dress and thanked the Ladies' Aid for their prayers. "It has been settled," she said, pressing one hand to her breast. "Mother Mercer will have a room at St. Anne's Home for aged women before the first frost. A sunny room, Mrs. Vale assures me. We are all so relieved." My cup trembled, but I did not spill it. At first I thought I had misheard. The hall was noisy. Forks scraped plates, the rain tapped the windows, and little Ruth had dropped a spoon beneath the table. But then Mrs. Vale put both hands together and said, "My dear Clara, what a Christian daughter you have been." A Christian daughter. I looked at my son Nathaniel. He stood by the side door with his hat in both hands, rein on his shoulders, his eyes fixed on the floorboards as if a verse of scripture were written there and only he could see it. "Nate," I said. Not loudly. I had not raised my voice in public since I had caught 2 railroad men fighting in my front hall in 1886. But a mother knows how to send a son's name across a room. He looked up, then away. That was answer enough. Clara saw me watching him and came quickly, skirts whispering, smile already prepared. She had a beautiful smile, I will say that for her. It arrived before her feelings and arranged the room to suit itself. "Mother," she said, bending over me, "do not be troubled. We meant to tell you after supper. We wanted everything to be certain first." "Everything," I repeated. "Only for your comfort." She touched my shoulder. I could feel the small bones of her fingers through my black wool sleeve. "St. Anne's has a garden and a proper matron and no stairs. You will not be alone all day while we manage the house. Think how peaceful it will be." Peaceful. That is what people call a place when they have decided not to live there themselves. I folded the paper napkin once, then twice, making the corners meet. My hands were old, but they were steady. They had skinned chickens, kneaded bread, buttoned children's coats, scrubbed blood from stair treads, counted rent in nickels, and held a husband's face while the life left it under a railroad lantern. They could fold a napkin while a room decided I was finished. "And what will happen to my room?" I asked. Clara's eyes flickered, only once. A small movement, but I saw it. Age had taken some sharpness from my hearing, not from my sight. "We shall make it useful," she said. Mrs. Vale, who had been listening with the satisfied sorrow of a woman near charity, added, "A sewing room for the mission girls, perhaps. Clara has such plans for Mercer House. It is too large for one elderly lady's keeping." Mercer House. My house. The greenhouse with the long porch across from the westbound platform, where every floorboard knew my foot and every window stuck in a different season. The house Elias bought with 20 years of splinters in his hands and coal smoke in his lungs. The house I kept when he died, and every man in town said a woman could not manage boarders, accounts, repairs, hens, meals, laundry, and a child besides. Too large for one elderly lady's keeping. I looked at Clara, at the fine gray dress I had altered for her myself when the waist was too tight after Peter was born. I looked at Nathaniel, still holding his hat as if it were the only honest thing in his possession. I looked at the women who had eaten my pies for years and now watched me with their heads tilted, already practicing how they would describe my reaction later. Then I stood. My knees complained, but they held. My back hurt, but it straightened. A hush moved down the table like wind over wheat. "Mrs. Vale," I said, "if I am to be carried off as a parcel, I should like to finish my coffee first." Somebody gasped. Somebody else gave a nervous little laugh. Clara's face went pale, then pink. I picked up my cup, drank the bitter coffee to the last cold mouthful, set it neatly on the saucer, and walked out into the rain without my shawl. No one stopped me. Perhaps they thought I needed the air. Perhaps they thought I was confused. But I knew the road home. I had walked it in deeper mud than that, with a basket on one arm and a feverish child on the other hip. I knew every rut between St. Matthew's and Mercer House. I knew where the boardwalk dipped near the livery stable, where the gas lamp failed outside the druggist, where the station bell could be heard before the train came around the bend. I was not confused. I was wet through, humiliated, and old. But I was not confused. Mercer House stood with all its windows dark except the kitchen lamp, which Nathaniel must have forgotten to turn low when he came to the supper. The rain silvered the porch rail. The sign Elias had carved in 1879 still hung above the steps, though the paint had faded and the M had cracked down the middle. Mercer House, clean rooms, hot meals, near depot. I stood in the yard a moment, looking at those words. Clean rooms, hot meals, near depot. Nothing about mercy. Nothing about daughters-in-law. Nothing about old women who had become inconvenient. The key was in my reticule. My key. Brass, worn smooth at the bow from 30 years of my thumb. It entered the lock as it always had, with a small resistance at the second turn. Elias had meant to mend that lock, and never did. After he died, I kept meaning to call the tinsmith, but then I grew used to the stubbornness. A house should resist a little. A house should know who is asking to enter. Inside, the hall smelled of lamp oil, wet wool, and the onion soup I had made at noon. The boarders were out or asleep. Mr. Calder, the telegraph clerk, worked nights twice a week. Miss Finch, who taught arithmetic at the schoolhouse, had gone to visit her sister in Peoria. The two traveling men in the East Room had taken supper at the hotel because Clara said their cigar smoke clung to the curtains. She had begun making rules before she owned anything to rule. I took off my bonnet, set it on the hall table, and looked up the stairs. My room was at the front of the second floor. It had not always been mine. When Elias was alive, we slept in the back room because he rose before dawn and did not like the station lamps in his eyes. After he died, I moved to the front because I could not bear the back window looking over the shed where his tools hung. The front room heard the trains. Freight at 4, passenger at 7, milk wagon at 5:30. I had lived by those sounds until they became less noise than pulse. Clara wanted my room because it was the largest after the parlor. She had said, last spring, that the light was wasted on me. "You never sew there anymore," she said, "and Ruth needs a place for her piano practice. It is a shame for the child to thump away in the dining room with boarders passing." Ruth, my granddaughter, hated the piano. She liked maps, marbles, and the timetable printed in the newspaper. She could name every stop between Chicago and St. Louis, and she kept blue jay feathers in a cigar box beneath her bed. But Clara had decided a girl with proper prospects must play hymns. So the piano was coming from Clara's aunt in Springfield, and my room, apparently, was leaving before it arrived. I climbed the stairs slowly, holding the rail. Not because I could not manage them, but because each step gave me time to think. At the landing, I passed the narrow room where Nathaniel and Clara slept. Their door was closed. Across from it was the children's room. Peter snored softly, all whistle and sigh. Ruth murmured in her sleep. I paused there, my hand on the knob, and almost went in. I wanted to look at her. I wanted to see one face in that house that had not been arranged against me. But I did not open the door. Children should not have to comfort old women before morning. In my room, the lamp waited on the bureau. I lit it and watched the flame climb, first blue, then gold. Everything was as I had left it. The walnut bed, the washstand, the framed photograph of Elias in his railway coat, the Bible with my spectacles resting on it, and at the foot of the bed, folded over the cedar chest, the railroad star quilt. That quilt was ugly in a way only beloved things may be ugly. No ladies' magazine would have printed its pattern. The stars were too large, the points uneven, the colors stubbornly mismatched. Blue calico from Nathaniel's baby dress, brown wool from Elias's work coat, a strip of red from the first curtains I ever bought new, black from my morning dress, yellow from flour sacks, green silk from a neck ribbon I had once considered too bright for a respectable woman, and worn anyway. The border was made of dark indigo pieces, almost plain unless lamplight struck the stitching. Then you could see small lines, tiny and neat, like a railroad map no company had drawn. Nora Shea had stitched that border. I had not thought of Nora at the church supper. I had not thought of her for years, except in the sharp, guilty way one avoids touching a bruise. But seeing the quilt in lamplight brought her back so clearly, I heard her needle clicking against her thimble. Nora had come to Mercer House in 1881 with a carpetbag, a cough, and boots too thin for Illinois mud. Irish, 26, widowed before she had learned to stop waiting for a husband's footstep. She took in laundry at first. Then she helped me with borders when my wrists swelled from soap lye and bread dough. She was quick with a needle, quicker with a song, and had a way of making men carry their own plates without noticing they had been instructed. Elias liked her. That was the plain fact, and plain facts can breed ugly stories if left in dark corners. He liked her jokes. He liked that she could mend his torn coat so the repair did not pull. He liked that she called him Mr. Mercer, with just enough mischief to make it sound like a title he had not earned. I saw all of that. I was younger then, though I did not feel young. I was 38, with a son of 7, a mortgage, 8 boarders, and a husband who came home smelling of creosote and iron. I was tired enough to mistake kindness for theft. When Nora left, she left the quilt. "For your bed, Mrs. Mercer," she said, standing in the kitchen with her carpetbag in hand. "You have made beds for half this town. Someone ought to leave warmth for yours." I thanked her, but stiffly. I remember that, stiffly, as if gratitude were a coin I could not spare. She looked at me as if she knew every unkind thought I had swallowed, and then she kissed Nathaniel on the crown of his head and went out before the morning train. For years I used the quilt only in winter. Later I kept it folded on the cedar chest, not because I disliked it, because I had never decided whether it accused me or comforted me. That night, wet from rain and burning from shame, I took off my black dress, put on my wrapper, and sat on the bed beside it. The quilt smelled faintly of cedar, dust, and old soap. I ran my fingers over the indigo border, feeling the small, firm stitches. "Well, Nora," I whispered, "they have made an old parcel of me." The house answered with a settling creak. Outside, the 9:40 freight blew its whistle east of town. The sound entered my room the way it had for 20 years, low and lonely, then fading toward the river. I waited for Nathaniel and Clara to come home. They arrived near 11. I heard the front door open softly. Clara's voice rose in the hall, tight with anger she did not want the boarders to hear. "She made a spectacle, Nathaniel." "She was surprised," my son said. "She was ungrateful." Ungrateful. I pressed my palm flat against the quilt. Nathaniel murmured something I could not catch. Clara answered more sharply. "Do you think rooms at St. Anne's open every day? Do you think your mother can keep up this house forever? The bank will not wait because she is sentimental." The bank. There it was. Not my health, not my comfort, not the garden at St. Anne's or the proper matron or the absence of stairs. The bank. My son said, "Lower your voice." "No," Clara whispered, which is often louder than speech. "I have lowered my voice for 5 years. I have cooked for boarders, smiled at drummers, patched curtains, and watched your mother sit in the front room like a judge while this house eats money. Uncle Whitcomb says if we can convert the front rooms by November, he can place 2 permanent railwaymen and perhaps the surveyor. Proper gentlemen, not peddlers. But we cannot do it with her clinging to the best room and the old ways." "It is her house," Nathaniel said. My heart moved toward him then, a foolish, old movement. A mother's heart will run toward a son even after he has stood silent while strangers bury her alive. Then he added, "For now." For now. 2 words can be more cruel than a paragraph if they are honest. Clara sighed. "The papers are nearly ready. Mr. Pike only needs her signature on the transfer of management. Once she is settled, she will not worry over accounts. You said yourself she does not read every line anymore." I had read every line until Clara took the account book to spare my eyes. "She may refuse," Nathaniel said. "Then you must persuade her. She has always done what you asked." Silence. I sat very still, my hand on Nora's quilt, while the house I had kept breathed around me. Rain ticked at the window. Somewhere below, the kitchen clock struck 11 in a tired little voice. She has always done what you asked. Yes, I had. When Nathaniel was a boy and wanted a book on engines, I sold eggs until I had enough. When he was 16 and ashamed that his coat was patched, I turned Elias's good Sunday coat into one for him and wore my old cape another winter. When he wanted to clerk at Whitcomb Bank instead of learning the boarding business, I said a clean collar might take him farther than a broom. When he brought Clara home, with her careful manners and hungry eyes, I made room. I had always done what he asked, because for many years, he had been the only living piece of Elias left to me. Downstairs, Clara's voice softened. That was when she was most dangerous. "Nate, I am trying to save us. Your mother will have care. Ruth will have a future. Peter will have a proper room. You will not be known as a man who let a boarding house sink him. And I thought, will have a sunny room where no one asks what was traded for it." Their door closed. I did not sleep. At midnight I rose, put on my spectacles, and took the account book from the drawer where Clara thought I did not know she kept it. She had moved it from the desk 2 months before, but old houses tell on new hands. I had heard the drawer stick. The book was tied with brown tape. I lit the second lamp and opened it on my bed. At first, the numbers swam. Not because my mind failed, but because anger makes poor ink of everything. I breathed, then read as I'd taught Ruth to read train schedules. Line by line, no guessing. Boarder's rent from August, $28. Coal paid, $12. Flour, $6. Lamp oil, $2. Then a note in Clara's narrow hand. Advanced to N.M. for bank obligation, $15. N.M. Nathaniel Mercer. In September, advanced to N.M. $20. In October, not yet balanced. Expected transfer against household equity. Household equity. My house had become a phrase. I turned pages backward. There were more advances, small at first, then bolder. $7, $9, $12. Money from boarders, from meals, from laundry, from the egg account. Clara had recorded them neatly, perhaps believing neatness made theft respectable. Or perhaps Nathaniel had promised to replace it. Men promise many things to women who keep ledgers. I closed the book. My first feeling was not rage, it was embarrassment. That surprised me, and then it shamed me further. I was embarrassed that I had not seen. Embarrassed that Clara had known where the money went and I had not. Embarrassed that my son had become a man who borrowed from his mother's bread and called it obligation. Then I looked at the quilt again. One indigo corner near the binding had come loose. Not much. A thread had broken, leaving a small gap where the batting showed pale as bone. I reached for my sewing basket. My hands wanted work. When the heart is too full, hands can sometimes keep it from spilling. I threaded a needle, turned the corner toward the lamp, and slid my fingers under the loose edge to smooth the batting. There was paper inside. At first I thought it must be a scrap left from the quilting frame. Women used old paper for patterns, for stiffening, for 100 small purposes. But this paper was folded, not trapped. It lay flat inside a narrow pocket made of the backing, sewn with stitches so fine I had never noticed them. I held my breath. The pocket ran along the whole corner of the quilt. My needle fell onto the bed. I worked the gap wider with my thumbnail, careful not to tear the cloth. The first paper slid out stiffly, browned at the edges. Then another. Then a third tied with a faded blue thread. My lamp hissed. On the top sheet, in Elias's hand, was my name. Abigail. Not Mrs. Mercer, not wife, not mother. Abigail. I knew his writing the way some women know a hymn by the first note. Upright letters, heavy downstrokes. The M always too large because he was secretly proud of our name. My fingers trembled then. I will not pretend they did not. I unfolded the letter. Abigail, if this reaches your eyes, it means Nora kept her promise better than I kept mine. Do not scold her. I asked too much of her and too little of you, and I pray God leaves me time to mend both faults. If he does not, let this paper stand where my mouth failed. The house is yours, not mine in courtesy, not yours only while I live, but yours in law and record. The deed enclosed was made and registered after the final payment, in April of 1881. I did this because I have seen too many widows turned out by sons, brothers, creditors, and smooth men with clean cuffs. I will not have you asking leave to sleep under a roof your hands have paid for. The last payment did not come from my wages. You must know the truth. It came from Nora Shea. I stopped reading. For a moment the room thinned around me. The lamp, the bed, the rain, the account book, all of it seemed to draw back. Only Nora's name remained. I read on. She would not let me tell you. She said pride was cheaper than shelter, and you needed shelter more. The money was wages owed to her late husband by the Rock Island contractor, collected after much trouble. She had meant to go west with it, but when the bank pressed us, she put it in my hand and said, "Pay the house. Women are lost first when roofs are lost." I know you have been troubled by my friendship with her. I saw it and lacked courage to speak plainly. There was no shame in it, except the shame I made by silence. Nora is not my sin, Abby. She is my creditor, my friend, and the woman who saved your house when I could not. She asks only this: if ever a woman comes to our door with no place to stand, remember that the roof over you was held by another woman's sacrifice. Forgive me for hiding this. Forgive her if you can. Keep the deed where no frightened man can trade it. Your Elias. I read the letter once, then again, then a third time, slower, because some truths must be entered like cold water. Nora had saved my house. Nora, whom I had watched with suspicion. Nora, whose songs I had found too cheerful, whose help I had accepted while guarding my gratitude like a locked drawer. Nora, who had stood in my kitchen with her carpet bag and said someone ought to leave warmth for my bed. The warmth had not been only cloth. I unfolded the other papers. There was a deed, sealed and witnessed, naming me, Abigail Mercer, as sole owner of Lot 9, Depot Road, with all buildings and appurtenances thereon. There were receipts from Whitcomb Bank. There was a note in Nora's smaller hand, the letters crowded and lively, even on paper. "Mrs. Mercer, he will tell you if God gives him spine in time. If he does not, the quilt will have more spine than the both of us." I stitched the papers where only mending hands would find them. A woman who never mends will never know. A woman who mends will know when she needs to. Do not let them make you small in your own house. Nora Shea. I pressed the note to my mouth. It smelled of nothing now, no soap, no cedar, no Nora, only old paper. But I could see her plainly, head bent over the quilt, dark hair escaping its pins, thimble flashing in lamplight, mouth set in that half-smile that had once made me feel judged. Perhaps I had been judged. Perhaps I had deserved it. I sat until dawn with the papers spread across my bed like a map of a country I had lived in without knowing its borders. When the first passenger train whistled, I rose and washed my face. My eyes were red, but my hands were steady again. At 6, I made coffee. At 6:30, I fried ham for the boarders. At 7, Clara came into the kitchen wearing her blue morning dress and the expression of a woman prepared to forgive me for embarrassing her. "Mother Mercer," she began. "Good morning, Clara." She paused. My tone was ordinary. Ordinary tones frighten guilty people more than shouting because they cannot tell where the blade is. Nathaniel entered behind her, collar unbuttoned, hair damp from a hurried wash. He looked tired. For one weak moment I saw the boy who used to come into the kitchen with sleep in his lashes and ask if there was brown sugar for oatmeal. Then he saw the account book on the table. His face changed. Clara saw it too. She looked from him to me, then to the book, then to the stove where the coffee boiled too hard. "I was balancing the accounts," I said. "You should have asked me," Clara replied. "The entries have become more complicated." "Yes," I said. I noticed. Nathaniel sat down without speaking. Peter came in then, dragging one suspender, and Ruth followed with her hair in 2 crooked braids she had done herself. Clara turned at once. "Ruth, mercy, what have you done to your hair?" "Grandmother likes it this way," Ruth said. I had never said that. She simply wanted to stand somewhere safe, and at that age, safety often borrows another person's name. "Sit down," I told the children. "There is ham before your father eats it all." Peter laughed. Ruth did not. She watched me with solemn gray eyes too old for her face. Breakfast moved like a wagon over stones. Spoons struck plates. Clara corrected Peter's elbows. Nathaniel drank coffee and looked at nothing. I served everyone because feeding people had not become shameful simply because they had behaved badly. After the children left for school and the boarders went out, Clara closed the kitchen door. "About last evening," she said. "Yes? I wish you had trusted us." That was a fine sentence. It walked into the room wearing gloves. "Trusted you to tell me where I am to live?" Her mouth tightened. "We were trying to spare you distress." "You spared me so thoroughly that Mrs. Vale knew before I did." Nathaniel rubbed his forehead. "Mother, Clara only meant—" "Do not say only, Nathaniel. It is a small word men use to hide large things." He lowered his hand. Clara drew herself up. "Very well. Plainly, then. This house is too much for you. The accounts are strained. The rooms need improvements if we are to attract respectable permanent boarders. You are tired. You forget things." "What have I forgotten?" "You left the pantry unlocked Tuesday." "Because Mr. Calder was fetching the kerosene tin." "You put salt in the apple batter." "A teaspoon. My mother did the same. It brightens the apples." "You slept in the parlor after dinner." "I am 68 years old. A nap is not a legal defect." Nathaniel almost smiled. Clara did not. "You make jests because you refuse to see the seriousness," she said. "St. Anne's is not the county poorhouse. It is respectable. Mrs. Vale has influence there. You would have a chair by the window, meals served, women of your own age, and you would have my room." The room went still. Clara's eyes hardened. For the first time since I had known her, the softness went out of her face entirely, leaving the bones of her ambition visible. "Yes," she said. "We would have the room. Ruth needs space. Peter needs space. Nathaniel needs a proper office if he is to recover his standing. I need a house that is not ruled by a woman who thinks suffering 30 years ago gives her the right to refuse every change." There, at last, the honest voice. It did not hurt as much as the kind one. "Recover his standing from what?" I asked. Nathaniel stood. "Mother, sit down." He did. I turned the account book so the entries faced him. "From what, Nathaniel?" He looked at Clara, then at the book. "It was a bank matter." "Money is usually a money matter. Explain." Clara answered for him. "Your son made an investment during the panic. Many men did. Many men jumped from bridges, too. That did not make it wise." Nathaniel flinched. Elias had died under a bridge, not from one, but my words had struck where I aimed. I was not proud of that. I record it because truth is not improved by trimming. He said, "Mr. Whitcomb said rail land outside Hallowell would rise when the spur was approved. I put money in, more than I should have. Then the company delayed. I had notes due." "How much?" He did not answer. Clara did. $240. I sat back. In 1898, $240 was not a foolishness. It was a roof, a winter, a funeral, a year's breath for a woman who counted lamp oil. "And the boarder's rent?" Nathaniel whispered. "Temporary." "Temporary is a word people use when they do not know how to repay." Clara put both hands on the table. "We had to keep the household decent. You think pride pays coal bills? You think your pies and your old sign can carry us? The town is changing. The railroad brings men with salaries. They will not sleep under quilts that smell of cedar and eat soup with peddlers. They want polish. They want order." "They want my room." "Yes," she snapped. "Yes, Abigail, they want your room. And so do I." Because I am tired of living like a boarder's wife in a house where every nail is a memory I am not allowed to touch. It was the first time she had called me Abigail. Strange how a disrespect may contain a plea. For a moment I saw Clara not as a villain in gray silk, but as a woman who had married a weak man and discovered too late that charm cannot be deposited at a bank. She had 2 children, debts, a name to protect, and an uncle who likely whispered that old women were obstacles with shawls. She was cruel, yes, but cruelty often grows where fear is watered daily. That understanding did not excuse her. It only kept me from hating her completely. "Clara," I said, "bring me my black bonnet." She blinked. "What?" "The one with the grosgrain ribbon." "Why?" "Because I'm going to see Mr. Pike." Nathaniel's head came up. "The lawyer? Is there another Mr. Pike who concerns us?" Clara recovered first. "There is no need. The management transfer can wait until you have had time to compose yourself." "I am composed." "You are upset." "I am wet from last night's rain, short of sleep, and newly informed that my son has been eating the house 1 spoonful at a time. But I am composed." Nathaniel covered his face. Clara said, "You cannot go alone." "I crossed this town alone when it had more mud than boardwalk and less charity than it boasts now. I can go alone to a lawyer's office." "People will talk." I looked at her then, and perhaps she saw what the church hall had not. Let them. Hallowell was never a large town, but in those years it believed itself on the edge of becoming one. The railroad had put a second track through in 1891. A brick bank rose where old Mr. Dabney's feed shed once leaned. The druggist installed a soda fountain that Clara considered proof of civilization. 2 streets had gas lamps, though one hissed more than it shone. Men spoke of factories the way children speak of Christmas, with great certainty and no evidence. I walked to Mr. Pike's office under a sky the color of dishwater. The rain had stopped, but the walks were slick. My black skirt brushed mud despite my best lifting. Twice men tipped their hats and asked whether I needed assistance. I thanked them and kept walking. Mr. Alden Pike kept his office above McCrory's Drug and Surgical Supply. He was a thin man with a beard that looked drawn on in ink and spectacles that made his eyes round as dimes. He had written Elias's simple will, witnessed half the deeds in town, and once removed a fishhook from Peter's thumb because Dr. Hodge was delivering twins. His clerk looked surprised to see me without Nathaniel. "Mrs. Mercer? Mr. Pike is in?" "Yes, ma'am, but he has Mr. Sutter at 10. Then he has me at 9. The clerk decided not to argue with a widow in a black bonnet before breakfast. Sensible boy. Mr. Pike rose when I entered. "Mrs. Mercer, this is unexpected." "Most useful things are." He offered a chair. I took it. Not the soft one for grieving widows, but the straight-backed chair before his desk. I opened my reticule and laid out the papers from the quilt. I had wrapped them in a clean tea towel because old paper deserves more respect than some living men. Mr. Pike's expression changed as he read. Surprise first, then concentration, then the careful blankness of a lawyer who has found a snake in a flour barrel and does not wish to alarm the cook. "Where did you obtain these?" "From a quilt." He looked over his spectacles. "A better hiding place than some banks, it appears," I said. He cleared his throat and examined the deed again. "This is valid. Recorded April 18th, 1881. I remember the transaction faintly. Your husband came with Mr. Whitcomb's predecessor. You were not present." "I was probably baking for 12 men. "Quite." "The house is mine." "The house is yours." Hearing it spoken in that office did something to me I had not expected. I had known, after reading Elias's letter. I had believed the papers. But the law has a cold voice, and sometimes cold things soothe burns. "Can Nathaniel transfer management without me?" "No." Can he borrow against the property? Not legally. Can Clara place me at St. Anne's? Mr. Pike leaned back. Not unless you consent, or unless a court finds you incapable of managing your own affairs. There has been no such petition. Could there be? He hesitated. Mr. Pike, I have kept boarders since before your clerk was born. Do not protect my nerves. A petition could be attempted. It would require testimony, a physician, evidence. You are not, if I may say so, an easy subject for that argument. Good. He touched Elias's letter. May I ask why this is surfaced now? My daughter-in-law announced at the church supper that I am to have a room at St. Anne's before the first frost. Mr. Pike's mouth tightened. Did you agree? I finished my coffee and walked home. He lowered his eyes, but I saw the smile he hid. There are also irregularities in the household accounts, I said. My son has debts. To Whitcomb Bank. You know of them? I know Mr. Whitcomb has been eager to see Mercer House under more, shall we say, active commercial management. He spoke of it in general terms. General terms have sharp teeth. Indeed. For the next hour we spoke plainly. I learned that Clara's uncle, Mr. Horace Whitcomb, had encouraged Nathaniel to believe the West Rooms could be renovated and rented to salaried railway employees at higher rates. I learned that a management transfer had been drafted, allowing Nathaniel to handle contracts, collect rents, and arrange improvements. It did not steal the house outright. Smooth papers rarely do. It merely placed the hands on the reins and waited for the horse to tire. Could such a paper be used against me later? It could complicate matters. Then it will remain unsigned. That is your right. I want more than a right, Mr. Pike. Rights are fine china. Useful, but only if kept from careless hands. He folded his hands. What do you want? I had not known until he asked. Then I did. A will. A new one. He took up his pen. Mercer House is not to be sold to pay Nathaniel's debts, I said. Not while I live, and not after. If Ruth wants education, the house may support it. If Peter needs honest help, the house may support it. But no grown person is to trade my roof for his mistake. Mr. Pike wrote. And I want a condition, I continued. If any heir attempts to remove me from Mercer House against my will, or to have me declared incompetent without true cause, that heir receives nothing from the property. He paused. Such provisions must be drafted carefully. Draft carefully, then. His pen moved again. And after my death, if Ruth is of age and wishes to keep the house as a boarding house, she may inherit it. If she does not, the house is to be placed in trust as rooms for women who need respectable lodging and cannot afford hotel rates. Widows, school teachers, seamstresses, travelers stranded by work or trouble. Name one room for Nora Shea. Mr. Pike looked up. Nora Shea? A woman who paid more toward Mercer House than most people who have eaten at its table. He did not ask more. A good lawyer knows when the living are speaking with the dead. And Nathaniel? He asked quietly. The question entered me like a pin. What does a mother leave a son who has tried to move her out of her own life? Nothing, anger said. Enough to remember mercy, Elias might have said. Enough to prevent Clara from calling me cruel, pride answered. I looked at the window behind Mr. Pike. Across the street, the station platform steamed in the damp morning. A porter wheeled trunks toward the baggage car. People always seemed to be leaving Hallowell, though most returned by supper. Nathaniel may have Elias's watch, I said at last. And my forgiveness, if he asks for it honestly while I'm living. I will not leave forgiveness in a will. People spend dead forgiveness too easily. Mr. Pike's pen stopped. For a moment, he was not a lawyer but a man listening. Very well, he said. We drafted until noon. My stomach growled once, and Mr. Pike sent the clerk for tea and biscuits. By the time I signed, my hand ached, but the signature was firm. Abigail Mercer. The letters looked like fence posts after a storm, weathered but standing. Mr. Pike sanded the ink and folded the documents. I will keep the executed will in my safe, and you will keep copies. The deed should also remain here, if you permit it. The deed has spent 17 years in a quilt. It deserves a safe, though I suspect it will find the company dull. He smiled. Mrs. Mercer, may I offer a word not strictly legal? At my age, free advice is either useless or brave. Go on. Do not confront them alone if you fear pressure. Mr. Pike, I have been pressured by hunger, fever, creditors, hens that stopped laying, and 8 men wanting breakfast at once. Nathaniel and Clara will not be the first. Family pressure is different. That was true. A stranger pushes your shoulder. Family pushes history. I will be careful, I said. He stood as I gathered my reticule. At the door I turned back. Mr. Pike, did Elias ever speak of Nora Shea to you? Not to me, but my father did. I waited. He said Mrs. Shea had the sharpest understanding of a contract he had ever seen in a laundrywoman. He meant it as a compliment, though poorly phrased. Nora, arguing with bankers in her thin boots. Nora, placing wages owed to a dead husband into Elias's hand. Nora, stitching papers into a quilt because she trusted cloth more than men. I nodded. Thank you. When I stepped outside, the clouds had broken. Sun fell on the muddy street in pale strips. The world had not changed. The druggist still swept his step. The train still smoked. Mrs. Vale still crossed the road with a basket on her arm. And when she saw me, her face arranged itself into sympathy. Mrs. Mercer, she called. My dear, we were all so concerned last night. Were you? She came closer. Clara was quite shaken. You must understand how delicate this season is for her. Managing a household with an elder can be such a trial. An elder? I had been promoted from parcel to trial. Mrs. Vale, I said. How old are you? Her mouth opened. I beg your pardon? You heard me. I am 59. Then I pray when you are 68, no one discusses you over oyster patties. Color rose in her cheeks. I tipped my head and walked on. It was not a Christian remark, but it was satisfying. Clara was in the parlor when I came home, measuring my life with a tape. She had moved the green chair from the window and rolled back the rug. A notebook lay on the piano bench, filled with columns in her hand. Mr. Whitcomb stood near the mantel, hat on his arm, silver beard trimmed to a point. He was Clara's mother's brother, and had the look of a man who believed money improved whatever it touched, including his own opinions. Nathaniel stood by the bookcase. He looked ill. The moment I entered, Clara lowered the tape. Mother Mercer, we did not expect you so soon. I live here. My timing is broad. Mr. Whitcomb bowed. Mrs. Mercer, I trust you are well after last night's excitement. My health continues to disappoint those who plan without me. Nathaniel shut his eyes. Clara forced a laugh. Uncle Horace was only advising us about possible improvements. To my parlor? To the property, Mr. Whitcomb said. A building so near the depot should produce more than transient lodging. With modest investment, Mercer House could become the preferred residence for railway supervisors, commercial agents, perhaps even unmarried engineers of standing. How lonely for the peddlers. His smile thinned. Sentiment is expensive, madam. So is presumption. Clara set the tape on the mantel. There is no need for hostility. We all want the same thing. Name it. Security. No, I said. You want control. Security is what people ask for when control has taken its hat off. Mr. Whitcomb turned to Nathaniel. Perhaps this is not the best moment. On the contrary, I said. It is the first honest moment we have had. I took off my gloves finger by finger. My hands were stiff from the damp and the signing, but I did not hurry. Clara watched me. She had begun to understand that I had not gone to Mr. Pike for comfort. Nathaniel, I said, tell Mr. Whitcomb what I told you this morning. My son swallowed. Mother will not sign the management transfer. Mr. Whitcomb's eyes sharpened. I see. Do you? I asked. Then see this also. No room in Mercer House will be promised, altered, leased, pledged, or prayed over without my consent. No account will be kept from me. No rent will be advanced to cover private debts. And no person in this room will discuss St. Anne's Home as my destination again. Clara gripped the back of the chair. Mr. Whitcomb said, Mrs. Mercer, you may own this house, but you cannot run from arithmetic. I have run toward arithmetic every Monday since 1879. The debts exist. Nathaniel's debts exist. Family debts. Do not dress a wolf in a family shawl, Mr. Whitcomb. It still has teeth. His face hardened. Bankers dislike poetry when it costs them money. Nathaniel spoke then, quietly. Mother, I meant to replace it. With what? He had no answer. With my room? With boarders I did not choose? With Clara's uncle standing in my parlor measuring my windows? Clara said, You speak as if we are thieves. I looked at her. Are you? Her eyes filled with tears. I had seen Clara weep before, but always prettily, as if tears knew where to fall on her face. These were not pretty. They stood bright and angry. You think I wanted this? She said. You think I dreamed as a girl of bargaining with my uncle while my husband hides behind door frames? You think I enjoy asking Mrs. Vale for favors? I have 2 children and a name tied to a sinking house. Your son signs notes like a man signing church cards, then comes home and says nothing. Someone had to act. Nathaniel flinched, but did not defend himself. There was the marriage, laid bare in one sentence. Clara pushing, Nathaniel yielding, both calling the motion duty. You chose to act over me, I said, not with me, because you would have refused. Yes. Then what choice had I? The honest one. She laughed once, sharply. Honesty is a luxury for people whose roof is not leaking. My roof is not leaking. I paid Jensen to mend it in May. With money we needed elsewhere. For Nathaniel's notes. Silence. Mr. Whitcomb put on his hat. I will leave you to family matters. No, I said, you will leave my house. He bowed again, lower this time, but not respectfully. Good day, Mrs. Mercer. When the front door closed behind him, the parlor seemed to exhale. Clara sat in the green chair as if her bones had loosened. Nathaniel remained standing. Mother, he began, not now. Please. I wanted to refuse him. I wanted to make him stand there until nightfall, holding all his failures in his hands. But he looked so much like Elias at that moment. Not in strength, but in the sorrow of having come too late to honesty. Say it then. He took a breath. I was ashamed. That is not an apology. No. He rubbed his palms together. No, it isn't. I was ashamed, and I let Clara carry the shame because she is better at carrying hard things in public. I told myself St. Anne's would be comfortable. I told myself you were tired. I told myself it was practical. Did you tell yourself I would not notice? He closed his eyes. Yes. The word hurt more for being true. Did you tell yourself I would forgive you because I am your mother? He whispered, Yes. I looked at my son, my only child, the boy I had saved from fevers, hunger, bad company, and his own soft nature as best I could. I had taught him to be gentle. I had not taught him courage. Perhaps I had mistaken one for the other because I needed to love what I had made. Nathaniel, I said, you may live here until the 1st of December. You will pay board at the same rate as any married couple with 2 children, minus the labor Clara actually performs and records honestly. Every dollar owed to the house will be written and repaid. You will seek work not arranged by Mr. Whitcomb. Clara stared. You are putting us out. I am putting accounts in order. Where are we to go? I do not know. That is a frightening sentence, is it not? Nathaniel sat down heavily. And the children? Clara asked. The children are welcome in my house. So are you, if you live honestly under its roof. But not as rulers, not as jailers, not as people waiting for an old woman to be carried out so the piano may come in. Clara wiped her face with the back of her hand, a gesture too young for her. For the first time, I saw not the grey dress, not Mrs. Vale's praise, not the ambition, but a frightened woman who had built her plan from rotten boards and called it a bridge.
I cannot go back to Uncle Horace,
she said, barely audible. Then do not. You do not know him. I know men who lend advice at interest. Her eyes met mine. Something passed there, not affection, not trust, but recognition. 2 women standing on opposite sides of a table, both understanding that the men they loved had cost them dearly. Ruth appeared in the parlor doorway before anyone could speak again. Her school satchel hung from one shoulder. She must have come through the kitchen and heard enough to know the air was dangerous. Grandmother, she said, are you going to St. Anne's? Clara's face crumpled. I went to Ruth and knelt, though my knees hated me for it. No, I said, I am not. She looked from me to her mother. Mama said they had a garden. They may, but my garden is here. We do not have a garden. Then we shall plant one. Ruth considered this with the seriousness she gave timetables. May it have beans? Beans, marigolds, and whatever blue flower you choose. Larkspur, she said at once. Then larkspur. Peter came behind her, chewing something he should not have had. Are we in trouble? Nathaniel made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. Yes, I said, but not the kind children caused. Peter nodded, satisfied. Children accept justice more quickly than adults when it spares them. That evening, I moved the account book back to the desk in the front room. Clara watched from the dining room, but did not stop me. Nathaniel went out after supper and returned with ink on his fingers and a notice from the freight office. They needed a night clerk for 3 weeks. The pay was poor, the hours worse, but it was honest. He placed the notice on the table without looking at Clara. I start tomorrow, he said. She said nothing. Later, after the children slept, Clara came to my room. She knocked. That mattered. Come in. She stood just inside the door, her hair unpinned, face washed of powder. Without its public brightness, she looked younger and more worn. I did not know about the account book at first, she said. But later I knew. Yes. I told myself I was keeping us from ruin. I know. She looked surprised. Do you? A woman can do wrong for a reason. The wrong remains. Clara folded her arms around herself. Mrs. Vale came this afternoon. She said you had been seen leaving Mr. Pike's office and that people were talking. People must have something to do between meals. She asked whether you were sound. There it was, the next move, Not Clara's, perhaps. Mrs. Vale's, Mr. Whitcomb's, the town's. Once an old woman resists, the world begins to ask whether resistance itself is proof of decay. What did you say? Clara's throat moved. I said you were sound enough to frighten us all. I almost smiled. Thank you. She nodded and turned to go. Clara. She stopped. Why St. Anne's? Why not speak to me first? For a moment I thought she would return to her polished reasons. Comfort, care, no stares. Then she looked at the quilt at the foot of my bed. Because I was afraid you would look at me exactly as you are looking now, she said, and I would have to see myself. That was the first honest thing she had given me without being cornered. It did not heal the wound. It did keep it from poisoning. After she left, I unfolded the railroad star quilt across my bed and lay beneath it. The indigo corner remained open where I had removed the papers. I tucked Nora's note beneath my pillow. The quilt was lighter without its hidden burden, but I felt its weight more than before. For 17 years, a dead woman had guarded my roof with thread. I had called myself alone too many times. The story might have ended there if people were as sensible as they pretend to be after being caught. But families, like trains, do not stop simply because a signal has been raised. They slow, they shriek, and sometimes they jump the track anyway. 3 days after my visit to Mr. Pike, Mrs. Vale came to Mercer House with Dr. Hodge. She chose 10 in the morning, when Clara was at the market and Nathaniel asleep after his first night shift at the freight office. The boarders were out. Only I remained, rolling pie crust in the kitchen while Ruth, home with a sore throat, readied the table with the quilt over her shoulders. She had brought it down herself, saying it smelled like a story. Mrs. Vale knocked, as if entering a sick room. Dr. Hodge looked apologetic before he removed his hat. Mrs. Mercer, Mrs. Vale said, we hope we are not intruding. Then hope has misled you. But come in. She glanced at the flour on my hands, the rolling pin, the apples waiting in a bowl. You are baking. I often do that in a kitchen. Dr. Hodge coughed. He had delivered Peter and set Nathaniel's broken collarbone at 12. He was a decent doctor, which is not the same as a brave one. Abigail, he said. Mrs. Vale expressed concern after the supper. About the roof fund? I put in 2 pies. About you. Ruth lowered her book. Mrs. Vale gave her a smile. Dear child, perhaps you should go upstairs. She should not, I said. She should learn how concern sounds when it arrives wearing someone else's shoes. Dr. Hodge shifted. There has been talk that you are under strain, making sudden legal changes, walking alone in rain, becoming agitated in public. Finishing bad coffee is not agitation. Mrs. Vale's lips pursed. My dear, sharpness does not help your case. I was unaware I stood accused. No one accuses you, she said. But when an elderly woman rejects reasonable care, those who love her must consider whether pride is clouding judgment. Ruth's fingers tightened on the quilt. I looked at Dr. Hodge. Ask your questions. He blinked. I beg your pardon? You came to see whether my mind is gone visiting without leaving word. Ask. Color rose in his face. Abigail, this is not a formal examination. Then make it one, so Mrs. Vale may carry home a full basket. Mrs. Vale stiffened. Dr. Hodge set his bag on a chair. To his credit, once forced into honesty, he did not perform foolishness. He asked the date. I told him. He asked the president. I said Mr. McKinley, and added that if the tariff could be examined for soundness, I would welcome it. He asked where I was. I said in my kitchen on Depot Road, in a house that owed him $6 from Peter's birth, because he had refused payment in pie and later accepted it in socks. He laughed despite himself. He asked me to count backward by sevens. I did. Ruth whispered the answers with me under her breath. He asked what I had eaten for breakfast. I told him coffee, toast, and the burned edge of ham because Peter had taken the middle. I then recited the current rents of every boarder in the house and the date Mr. Calder's next payment was due. When I finished, Dr. Hodge closed his bag. "Mrs. Vale," he said, "Mrs. Mercer is fatigued, perhaps angry, and entirely in possession of herself. But sudden changes in temperament are often caused by other people behaving badly," he said. That was brave for Dr. Hodge. I have always believed in recording courage where it appears, especially in small men. Mrs. Vale's face went white around the mouth. "I was only trying to help." "Help whom?" I asked. She looked at Ruth, then back at me. "This town has standards, Abigail." "Yes, I have been feeding them for years." "You will regret making enemies." "At my age, Mrs. Vale, one should know which enemies are worth the room they take." She left without taking tea. Dr. Hodge remained. He washed his hands at the sink, though he had touched nothing that needed washing. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "For coming, or for needing to be told why?" "Both." That was honest enough. He looked at Ruth. "Your throat?" "Better," she said. "Let me see." She submitted to examination with the grave dignity of a judge. He pronounced her fit for weak tea, toast, and no arithmetic until Monday, a prescription that improved her opinion of medicine. When he had gone, Ruth stayed at the table, wrapped in the quilt. "Grandmother?" "Yes?" "Why did Mrs. Vale want you to be not sound?" Children ask questions adults spend whole lives disguising. I dusted flour from my hands. "Because if I am not sound, people do not have to listen when I say no." Ruth considered this. "Mama says no all the time, and people listen." "Your mother is young enough for people to call it management." "And you?" "I am old enough for them to call it decline." Ruth frowned. "That is not fair." "No." "What do we do when things are not fair?" It was a question I had answered many times when she was smaller, and Peter took a slate pencil or a boarder sat in her chair. I usually said, "We speak plainly, then we mend what we can." That morning, with Nora's quilt around Ruth's thin shoulders, the answer felt larger. "We remember," I said, "and we write things down." Ruth nodded solemnly. "In ink?" "Always in ink." So I gave her a small notebook from the desk, the kind I used for egg accounts, and on the first page she wrote in careful letters, "Grandmother said no." Then she looked up. "What else?" I thought of Elias's hidden letter, Nora's note, the account book, Mr. Pike's will, all the papers women kept because memory, by itself, was too easily overruled. "Write this," I said. "A house can remember, but paper can speak." She wrote that, too. The town did talk. Of course it did. At the general store, Mrs. Vale said grief had made me suspicious. At the post office, Mr. Whitcomb said old houses were often ruined by sentiment. At church, Clara sat very straight while women leaned near and murmured condolences for difficulties they had helped create. Nathaniel heard men laugh about Mercer's mother holding the deed like a shotgun, and he came home with his jaw tight but said nothing. Silence was still his first language. But change entered the house anyway. The first change was the account book. It remained on the desk in the front room, open every morning. Clara and I entered every sum together. She wrote in her narrow hand. I checked the arithmetic. At first, we did this like enemies sharing a treaty table. By the second week, we did it like clerks. By the third, she began bringing receipts without being asked. The second change was Nathaniel's work. Night labor humbled him, though not beautifully. He came home at dawn smelling of coal smoke and cold iron, hands blackened by freight tags.
For the first time since boyhood, he fell asleep because his body had earned it, not because conversation frightened him. He paid the first $5 back to the house on October 21st. I wrote it down. He stood beside me until I sanded the ink. "Thank you," he said. "Do not thank me for receiving what is owed." "No, I mean—" He stopped. Words lined up poorly for him when they mattered. I waited. "I mean for not sending me away yesterday." Yesterday he had broken a lamp chimney and cursed at Peter for asking why his hands shook. Clara had taken Peter upstairs. Nathaniel had sat in the kitchen with his face in his hands. I had wanted to strike him with every unpaid dollar. Instead, I put coffee before him and said, "You will apologize to your son before supper." He did. "You are my son," I said. "That is not a receipt I can tear up." His eyes filled, but he nodded and went to bed. The third change was Clara. She did not become gentle.
Let no one tell you every hard woman is waiting for one conversation to turn her into a saint. Clara remained sharp. She corrected Ruth's posture, despised muddy shoes, and folded napkins as if the governor might arrive disguised as a drummer. But she stopped speaking of my rest as if it were a railway destination. She stopped touching my elbow in public to guide me away from decisions. She stopped calling Mercer House too much for me in front of others. Once, I heard her in the hall with Mrs. Vale, who'd come under pretense of returning a pie plate. "We remain concerned," Mrs. Vale said. "Do not," Clara answered. "My dear, you cannot mean—" "I mean exactly. Mrs. Mercer is not to be discussed in committees." "But the arrangement with St. Anne's was premature." "You announced it yourself." "Then I was prematurely foolish." There was a silence so rich, I nearly stepped into the hall to enjoy it openly. Mrs. Vale left without the pie plate. Afterward, Clara came into the kitchen and found me trimming beans. "You heard," she said. "I am old, not buried." She sat across from me. "I cannot bear that woman." "That did not prevent you from using her." "No." Clara took a bean and snapped it too hard. "No, it did not." We trimmed in silence. After a while she said, "My mother died in a charity ward." I looked up. Clara's eyes remained on the beans. "I was 15. Uncle Horace paid for the burial and reminded me of it every Christmas until I married. He took me into his house, but not kindly. There are rooms that look respectable from the street and feel like institutions from the inside." I did not speak. Some doors should not be pushed once opened. "When I said St. Anne's had a garden," she continued, "I knew it did. I also knew a garden does not make a woman free." "Then why?" She swallowed. "Because if you went there by choice, I could tell myself I was not doing to you what was done around me. I could make it pretty." A bean snapped in my hand. "Clara," I said, "pretty cruelty is still cruelty." "I know." "Do you?" She looked at me then. "I am beginning to." It was not forgiveness. It was a first board laid across a ditch. Whether it would hold, neither of us knew. The fourth change came from the quilt. Ruth had become fascinated with it. She asked about every patch. I told her what I knew. The brown wool was Elias's coat, the blue calico, Nathaniel's baby dress, the red, the curtains, the black, my morning dress, the yellow, flour sacks, the green silk, my ribbon. "And this?" she asked, touching the indigo border. "Nora Shea's stitches."
Who was Nora Shea?
I hesitated, not because the answer was shameful, but because my part in it was. A woman who worked here when your father was small. She helped save this house.
How?
I told her some of it, not all. Children do not need every bitterness served at once. But I told her Nora had been poor, brave, and better to me than I had been to her.
Ruth listened with the stillness she gave maps.
Where is she now? I do not know. That troubled me more after I said it. Nora had left in 1881. I had heard years later that she worked at a laundry in Joliet, then that she married a blacksmith. Then nothing. Women without family names written on property vanish easily from town memory. They become that Irish woman, the seamstress, the widow, the one who sang. Even gratitude, if delayed too long, may find no address. That night I took out Nora's note again. A woman who mends will know when she needs to. I had found the papers when I needed to, but Nora had needed something too, and I had not asked what. She had needed acknowledgement, friendship, perhaps simply a hand held out without suspicion. The next morning I went to the post office and asked old Mr. Larkin whether he remembered Nora Shea. "Irish Nora?" he said, as if the adjective were her Christian name. "Worked for you, didn't she?" "She worked with me." He looked surprised at the correction, then shrugged. "Might have gone to Joliet or Bloomington. Hard to say. People moved." At the laundry, Mrs. Pell remembered a Nora who married a man named Klein, or Klein, perhaps. At the Catholic Church, Father Donnelly searched a register and found no marriage. But he found a burial for a Mary Shea, infant, in 1882. Not Nora. A child. I sat with that entry longer than I expected. Had Nora left pregnant? Had she lost a child? Had we all been too busy watching her laughter to see her grief? Father Donnelly also found a baptism. Margaret Ellen Shea, born 1883, mother, a Nora Shea, father not recorded. A Nora. Nora's full name. "There is a woman named Margaret Klein who runs a mending room near the East Yard," Father said. "She might be connected. Red hair, quick tongue. If she is Nora's daughter, you will know it before she tells you." He was right. I found Margaret Klein 2 days later in a narrow shop behind the harness maker. A bell rang when I entered. The room smelled of steam, wool, and vinegar. 3 women bent over mending. At the back, a woman of perhaps 15 or 16 looked up from a man's torn sleeve. She had Nora's eyes, grey-green, amused before the mouth allowed it.
Mrs. Mercer,
she said. I gripped my reticule. "You know me?"
I know of you. Ma said if a woman ever came in looking like a black umbrella with a backbone, that would be Mrs. Mercer of Hallowell.
I laughed. I had not expected to. It came out rusty. "Your mother is Nora Shea?"
Was.
Her needle paused.
She died 3 years ago.
There are many kinds of lateness. Missing a train, arriving after supper, standing before a dead woman's daughter with gratitude finally ripe and no hand left to receive it. "I am sorry," I said. Margaret studied me.
Were you friends?
The easy lie stood ready. Yes, dear friends. Women use that lie often at graves and parlors, when memory would make the room uncomfortable. "No," I said. "She was my friend. I was not hers, as I should have been." Margaret's face changed, not softened, opened. "That sounds more like Ma." One of the sewing women glanced up, then down again. Margaret stood and wiped her hands on her apron. "Come to the back. We have tea, if you do not mind it strong enough to take varnish off." The back room was scarcely larger than my pantry, A stove, 2 chairs, a shelf with cups, and a window looking at the alley. Margaret poured tea black as ink and set it before me.
Ma spoke of Mercer House, she said. Not often, but when she did, it was like a place in a song.
A good song?
A sad one, with a good chorus.
I smiled. That was Nora. Margaret leaned back.
She said Mrs. Mercer could bake bread for 20 men, scare a drunk sober with one look, and make a bed so tight a coin would bounce. She also said Mrs. Mercer had pride enough for 2 women and sense enough for 1.5.
Generous.
For Ma, very.
I took Elias's letter and Nora's note from my reticule. I had debated bringing them. They were mine, yet not only mine. Some papers belonged to the person who wrote them, some to the person named in them, and some to the child who has inherited unanswered questions. Margaret read Nora's note first. Her mouth tightened at the corner, just as Nora's had when hiding laughter. Then she read Elias's letter. By the end, her eyes shone, but no tears fell.
She never told me about the money,
Margaret said.
Elias wrote that she would not let him tell me either.
That sounds like her. She liked grand sacrifices so long as nobody thanked her in public. I would have thanked her badly, I said. Margaret looked at me over the letter.
But I would have thanked her.
Would you? The question was fair. I looked at my hands. They had grown older since entering that room. Or perhaps they had simply been seen by someone with Nora's eyes. I do not know, I said. I want to say yes because it comforts me. But I was jealous, proud, tired. Your mother was kind to my husband and useful to my house, and I made both things smaller because I feared them. Perhaps I would have thanked her with words and punished her with manner. I hope not. I cannot swear otherwise. Margaret folded the letter carefully.
Ma said you were a hard woman.
She was right.
She said hard women often keep roofs up because soft men lean on them.
I almost laughed again, but it caught in my throat. She was right twice. Margaret slid the papers back.
Why come now?
I told her. Not every account, not every shame, but enough. The church supper, St. Anne's, the hidden deed, the will. When I finished, Margaret stood, went to a trunk beneath the shelf, and took out a small bundle wrapped in muslin.
Then you should have this.
Inside was a square of indigo cloth, the same as the quilt border, and a small brass thimble worn thin at the rim.
Ma kept the cloth from your quilt,
she said.
She said she had stitched a promise into its twin and expected it to be found when needed. I thought it was one of her sayings.
I touched the thimble. May I? Margaret nodded. It fit poorly. Nora's finger had been narrower than mine. I held it in my palm instead.
She died in her own room,
Margaret said suddenly.
Since you may want to know. Not in a ward, not in a poorhouse. In a room over a bakery in Joliet. She had geraniums in the window and cursed the priest for stepping on the rug.
I'm glad.
She was not easy.
No.
But she was never small.
I closed my fingers around the thimble. No, I said. She was not. When I left, Margaret came with me to the door.
Mrs. Mercer?
Yes.
If you name a room for her, do not make it too sweet.
What do you suggest? She thought.
Put a good lock on the door. Ma cared more for locks than lace.
I promised I would. On the train home, with Nora's thimble in my glove, I looked out at wet fields and brown corn stubble and thought of all the women who had held roofs for one another, without hymns, plaques, or church committees. Women who lent money quietly. Women who stitched papers into quilts. Women who carried soup to a widow. Women who told the truth on a stair landing. Women who fought badly
forgave slowly, and still passed warmth hand to hand, because winter did not care whether one had been perfect. By the time Hallowell came into view, I knew the house would change again. This time, by my choosing. November entered cold. The first frost silvered the porch rail the week I was supposed to move to St. Anne's. Clara said nothing that morning, but I saw her glance at the calendar. Nathaniel saw too. He took his coffee outside, though it was too cold for porch drinking, and stood under the Mercer House sign until the freight whistle called him back to his body. I did not mark the day. I had work. A carpenter named Jensen came to fit a new lock on the small west room, the one that had once stored trunks and broken chairs. I had cleared it myself, over Clara's objections that I would strain my back. Ruth helped carry hat boxes. Peter found a dead mouse and behaved as if he had discovered treasure. We scrubbed the walls with vinegar water, beat the rug, washed the window, and set up an iron bed, a washstand, and a chair with a mended cane seat. Above the bed, I hung a small framed card Ruth made in her best hand. Nora Shea Room. Lockworks. Window opens. No questions before supper. Clara read it and made a sound that might have been disapproval, but I saw the corner of her mouth move. "No questions before supper?" she said. Margaret Klein advised against sweetness. "Who is Margaret Klein?" "Nora's daughter." Clara looked at the card again. "It is not elegant." "No." "But it is clear." "Yes." The first woman to sleep in that room arrived on a Tuesday evening with a torn valise and a bruise hidden poorly under powder. Her name was Mrs. Lottie Bell, though I suspected Bell was borrowed. She had missed the eastbound train, she said. Then she said she had chosen to miss it. Then she said nothing for a while. The old me might have asked too much too soon in the name of order. The older me gave her soup, a basin of warm water, and the key. "Breakfast at 7, I said. "If you need to leave earlier, the back door sticks unless you lift the latch." She looked at the key in her hand. "How much?" "What can you pay?" Her eyes filled with suspicion. Free kindness often looks like bait to women who have paid dearly. "I can mend," she said. "Plain sewing?" "Good. We have sheets that believe themselves immortal." She almost smiled. After she went upstairs, Clara found me in the pantry. "Who is she?" "A woman with a key." "That is not an answer." "It is the only one I have."
Clara leaned against the shelf.
"This house is not a refuge." "It is now." "And if her husband comes?" "Then he will find Mercer House has locks on both sides of the door." Clara looked toward the stairs. "You cannot save every woman who comes with a valise." "No, but I can stop measuring worth by whether the room could rent hire to a man with cufflinks." She flushed. "That was Uncle Horace." "It was also you." "Yes," she said. The word came easier now. Not easily. Easier. Lottie stayed 4 nights. She mended 6 sheets, slept like the dead, and left before dawn with coffee in a tin cup and bread wrapped in a napkin. On the bureau, she left 32 cents and a note. "I remembered my sister in Decatur. I had forgot I had somewhere to go until I slept." I kept the note in the account book. Not all payments fit columns. Word spread, though not the way Mrs. Vale spread things. This word traveled by laundries, schoolrooms, train platforms, and the backs of kitchens. A schoolteacher from Mason City stayed 2 weeks after losing her position for refusing the superintendent's hand on her waist. A Norwegian widow stayed a month while waiting for her brother's fare. Margaret Klein came one Saturday with 2 bundles of mending and Nora's thimble on a chain around her neck. She stood in the doorway of the Nora Shea Room and nodded once. "Ma would say the bed is too narrow," she said. "Would she stay?" "If the lock worked." "It does." "Then yes." Not everyone approved. Mrs. Vale said Mercer House had become unsuitable for respectable families. Mr. Whitcomb said charity lodging would damage property values near the depot. The hotel keeper complained I was undercutting honest business, though no woman with 32 cents and a bruised cheek had ever troubled his sheets. Even Nathaniel objected at first. "Mother, we already have debts." "We also have rooms." "Rooms should earn."
"They do."
"Not enough."
"Enough for what?"
He had no answer, because the old answer, to keep up appearances, had begun to sound thin even to him. The night clerk position became permanent. Nathaniel did not love it, but work does not ask to be loved. He learned the freight schedules. He learned which men lied about weights and which simply guessed. He came home with stories of crate labels, delayed cattle, and a conductor who snored standing up. Peter adored these stories. Ruth corrected the routes. One morning, I found Nathaniel at the desk entering his board payment before I had risen. The figure was correct. That was perhaps the first apology he wrote fluently. Clara changed in uneven weather. Some days she seemed almost relieved, as if my refusal to vanish had taken from her the burden of succeeding at my removal. Other days, bitterness returned. She would see Lottie Bell's empty cup or Margaret's mending bundles and say, "We are not running an institution," with a sharpness meant for me and perhaps for St. Anne's. Then she would be quiet at supper and later bring clean towels to the West Room without being asked. Once, near Thanksgiving, I found her in the pantry crying into a dishcloth. I had never seen Clara cry when no one could admire or answer it. I started to withdraw, but she saw me. "I burned the cranberry sauce," she said. The pot on the stove was indeed ruined, but not enough for such tears. "Cranberries are dramatic fruit," I said. She gave a wet laugh, then covered her mouth. I stood beside her, not touching. We were not there yet. "Uncle Horace wrote," she said after a while. "He says if Nathaniel does not settle the note by January, he will call it formally. He says he has been patient because of family. He underlined family twice." "How much remains?" $193. It was still a mountain. "Did Nathaniel see the letter?" "No." "Show him. He will fold into himself. Then let him unfold. You cannot keep standing in front of consequences like a draft screen." She pressed the dishcloth to her eyes. "I do not know how to stop." There are confessions that ask for comfort, and confessions that ask for instructions. This one asked for both. "Start by burning only cranberries," I said. She laughed again, a real laugh this time, small but clean. Then she handed me the letter. "Read it," she said. "Please." I did. Mr. Whitcomb's hand was elegant, his cruelty grammatical. He did not threaten directly. He regretted. He reminded. He trusted she would guide her husband toward prudence. He mentioned my recent eccentricities and suggested they might create legal openings if handled with delicacy. Handled with delicacy. I folded the letter. "Clara." "Yes?" "Your uncle is a spider with stationery." She stared at me, then laughed so hard she had to sit on the flour bin. That evening she showed Nathaniel the letter. He did fold into himself, as predicted. But this time, after an hour alone in the yard, he came back and said, "I will speak to Mr. Pike." Not Mr. Whitcomb, Mr. Pike. Progress can be as small as choosing a different door. They made arrangements, hard ones. Nathaniel signed a repayment schedule for his personal notes. His wages went first to the debt, then to board, then to household expenses. Clara sold 2 pieces of jewelry her uncle had given her, not to save appearances, but to cut the cord. She cried after selling them,
then became furious that she cried, then cleaned the pantry shelves with such force that Peter asked whether the jars had misbehaved. By Christmas, the debt had fallen below $150. By then, people had stopped speaking of St. Anne's in my hearing. Not because they had grown kinder, because I had grown inconvenient to pity. Christmas at Mercer House had always been a crowded business. Boarders with nowhere to go, children sticky with molasses, men pretending not to care about small gifts, women pretending not to see men care. Elias used to bring in a cedar branch and nail it above the hall mirror. After he died, I kept the branch and added red ribbon. Clara, in her first year, tried to replace it with a proper parlor tree. The boarders knocked needles into the carpet, and Peter ate a glass bead, so the branch returned. In 1898, the branch hung above the mirror with red ribbon, 2 paper stars from Ruth, and a small tin train Peter insisted represented prosperity. The Nora Shea Room was occupied by Miss Ellen Price, the schoolteacher from Mason City, who had found temporary work copying documents for Mr. Pike. Margaret Klein came for supper and brought a fruitcake dense enough to anchor a boat.
Dr. Hodge came with cigars for the men and throat lozenges for everyone, because he believed in practical gifts. Even Clara looked almost pleased, though she arranged the plates 3 times. Nathaniel gave me a parcel wrapped in newspaper. Inside was Elias's watch. For a moment I could not speak. I'd kept it in my bureau since the day the railroad men brought it to me. Stopped at 3:17. The crystal cracked. Nathaniel must have taken it to the jeweler. "It works," he said. "Mr. Abel repaired the spring. The crack remains. I told him to leave it." I opened the case. The second hand moved, tiny and stubborn. "Why?" I asked. Nathaniel's face reddened. "Mr. Pike said your new will left it to me. I thought I should not wait until you were dead to deserve it." The room had gone quiet, in the way rooms do when family matters step into public light. "Do you?" I asked. He looked at the floor. Then he looked at me. "No, not yet. There are gifts wrapped in paper and gifts wrapped in humility. The second are rarer." I closed the watch and placed it back in his hand. "Keep it wound," I said. His fingers closed around it. Clara turned away quickly, but not before I saw her wipe her cheek. After supper, Ruth begged me to tell the quilt story. Not all of it, I warned. A Christmas table did not require banknotes and betrayal, but she insisted on Nora, the hidden papers, and the room with the working lock. Margaret listened with her arms folded, correcting me twice. "Ma would not have said foolish man," she interrupted. "She would have said, poor thick-headed creature. At my table we soften the dead. Ma would object." We laughed. Even Clara smiled. When the children had gone upstairs and the boarders drifted to their rooms, Margaret stayed behind to help me clear dishes. In the kitchen, she rolled up her sleeves and plunged her hands into hot water. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, "if you are washing dishes in my kitchen, you may call me Abigail." "That feels impertinent." "Good. Nora would approve." Margaret smiled. "Abigail, then. I've been thinking about the West Room. What trouble has it caused now?" "None. That is the point. Women come and go. They need mending, letters written, sometimes references. You cannot do all of it alone." "I have Clara." Margaret looked at me. "Some days," I amended. "I could come Tuesdays and Fridays, half day. Mend, keep a small record, help women find work or trains. Not charity, work. Pay me when the room is occupied by those who can pay. When it is not, I bring my own mending." I studied her. Nora's daughter, offering not sentiment, but terms. "You drive a bargain like your mother." "Better. She gave away mortgages." "Can you read ledgers?" "Upside down, if the man across the desk is lying." then Tuesdays and Fridays. She held out a wet hand. I shook it. The Nora Shea Room became more than a room after that. Margaret made a ledger of names, dates, payments, destinations, and warnings. Warnings mattered. A husband looking for a runaway wife, a factory foreman who withheld wages, a cousin who promised help and sold trunks. She wrote plainly, in ink, and locked the book in the desk drawer. Ruth watched everything. She began copying timetables for women who needed to leave before dawn. She learned which trains allowed baggage through to Chicago and which required transfer at Decatur. She saved string. She made labels. Clara said it was unsuitable education for a girl. Then, one afternoon, Clara found Ruth helping Miss Price draft a letter of application to a school in Rockford, and instead of scolding, she corrected the salutation. "If you want respect," Clara said, "do not begin as if begging." Miss Price got the position. Clara pretended not to be pleased for 3 days. January brought ice and Mr. Whitcomb. He came on a bright, cruel morning when the road was frozen into ridges and the station smoke hung low. He entered without waiting for me to answer the parlor door, which was his first mistake. His second was bringing Mrs. Vale. Nathaniel was at the freight office. Clara was upstairs changing sheets. Margaret sat at the desk, entering the departure of Mrs. Lottie Bell, who had returned for one night on her way to Decatur, with her sister's address pinned inside her coat. Ruth was beside her, sharpening pencils. Mr. Whitcomb looked at Margaret as one might look at a cat on a dining table. "I have come to speak with Mrs. Mercer privately." "Then you should have come privately," Margaret said without rising. Mrs. Vale gasped. "Who is this person?" "The keeper of the ledger you are not in," Margaret said. Ruth choked on a laugh. I came from the kitchen wiping my hands. "Mr. Whitcomb, Mrs. Vale, to what do I owe the pleasure of locking the door after you leave?" Mr. Whitcomb removed his gloves. "Madam, this has gone far enough." "Many things have. Specify." "Your experiment with transient women has damaged the reputation of this house and, by extension, my niece. Men at the bank speak." "Men at the bank should try sums. It would occupy them." Mrs. Vale said, "Abigail, your bitterness is leading you into vulgar associations." Margaret looked delighted. "That is me, I think." I held up a hand before she could improve the situation beyond repair. Mr. Whitcomb took a paper from his coat. "I also hold Nathaniel's note, now overdue in part." "Nathaniel has an arrangement through Mr. Pike." "An arrangement I have not accepted." "Then discuss it with Mr. Pike." "I am discussing it with the woman preventing a sensible solution." Ah, there he was. The banker beneath the uncle, beneath the gentleman. Which sensible solution? "Sale of this property would satisfy all debts, provide you with ample support at St. Anne's or another respectable home, and give Nathaniel's family a new beginning. Your obstinacy benefits no one." Ruth stood. "It benefits grandmother." Mrs. Vale turned on her. "Child, do not speak of matters beyond you." I stepped between them. "Mrs. Vale, speak to my granddaughter as if her memory will outlive you. It likely will." She closed her mouth. Mr. Whitcomb laid the paper on the desk. "If you will not consider family, consider law. Debts have consequences." "Indeed," I said. "So do threats." He leaned toward me. "You are not as secure as you imagine." Margaret stopped writing. I felt no fear then, which surprised me. Perhaps fear, like lamp oil, can be used up in one long night and leave only smoke. "Mr. Whitcomb," I said, "I have a recorded deed, a witnessed will, a lawyer less fond of you than you suppose, a doctor who has found me sound, and a town full of women learning which door opens when they need it. What do you have? His nostrils flared. The answer was a note, a reputation, and a niece he had used too often. Clara came down the stairs then. She had heard. Her face was pale, but she did not look away. "Uncle Horace," she said. "Clara, collect your things. You and the children will come to my house until your husband remembers his duty." The old Clara might have gone still, smiled, and said she was grateful. This Clara gripped the banister, descended one step, then another. "No." Mr. Whitcomb looked more shocked than he had when I insulted him. "No?" "No. My children will not live in your house." "After all I have done." "Yes," she said. "After all." The silence that followed was the sound of a debt changing hands. He folded the paper slowly. "You will regret this." Clara's voice shook, but it held. "I already regret much. I am learning the order." Ruth slipped her hand into mine. Mr. Whitcomb turned to me. "You have made her ungrateful." "No," I said. "You educated her thoroughly. She has graduated." Margaret laughed outright. Mrs. Vale made a small choking sound. Mr. Whitcomb left with his note, and his dignity both creased. Mrs. Vale followed, but at the door she turned back. "Abigail, this town will not forget." "Good," I said. "We are trying to improve its memory." After the door closed, Clara sat on the bottom stair. She looked as if her bones had been removed. Ruth ran to her. Peter, drawn by noise, appeared at the top landing and shouted, "Are we poor?" Clara laughed and cried at once. "A little," she said. Peter considered. "Can poor people have molasses?" "Sometimes," I said. "Then it is not the worst." No philosopher has improved on that in my hearing. The legal matter with Mr. Whitcomb took until March to settle. Mr. Pike negotiated. Nathaniel signed. Clara testified to the household advances. That cost her pride, but she paid it. Mr. Whitcomb accepted a schedule because his alternative involved explaining in court why he had encouraged a bank clerk into speculative land notes while eyeing the clerk's mother's property. Bankers like public morality when they hold the sermon. They dislike being the text. By spring, Mercer House had become two houses living under one roof. One was still a boarding house near the depot, meals at 7 and 6, clean sheets, no drunkenness, payment due Fridays, hot bricks for beds in winter, porch chairs in summer, and my stare for men who thought the maid invisible. The other was quieter and harder to name. A room with a lock, a ledger in Margaret's hand. A network of women who knew which train left before dawn, which doctor would come without questions, which employer paid in cash, which church lady offered help that became a chain. It was not grand. It did not rescue everyone. Sometimes a woman returned to the very trouble she had fled. Sometimes a letter brought bad news. Sometimes a bed stood empty when we wished it occupied, and occupied when we had no strength left for another story. But the room existed, Nora's room. And because it existed, women who had forgotten they had somewhere to go sometimes remembered. Clara became useful to it in spite of herself. She knew manners, letters, appearances, the armor of respectability. She could take a woman with shaking hands and dress her for a railway interview so no ticket agent dared call her vagrant. She could write to a school board, a widow's cousin, a mill office, and make need sound like qualification. She never became soft, but she became exact in the service of women other than herself. One evening in April, I found her teaching Lottie Bell how to sit with a straight spine while asking for wages owed. "Do not wring your gloves," Clara said. "It suggests apology." "You are not apologizing for work performed." Lottie tried again. "Better," Clara said. "And do not say, if convenient. Men hear that as never." I stood in the hall and thought of the church supper,
Clara's hand on her breast, her voice thanking the lady's aid for sending me away. People do not become different by denying what they were. They become different by putting the same strength to another use. Nathaniel took longer. Shame can either rot a man or season him. For months, I did not know which would happen. He worked, paid, ate, slept, and spoke little. The children learned not to ask too many questions when he came home gray with fatigue. But in May, a freight accident outside Hallowell changed something. A brakeman's wife, Mrs. Ansell, arrived at Mercer House at midnight with 2 children and no money. Her husband had been taken to the county hospital, leg crushed, wages uncertain. The railroad would consider its obligation, which meant it would wait to see whether he died. I was rousing Margaret, who had stayed over because of storm, when Nathaniel came in from the freight office. He saw Mrs. Ansell in the hall, the children asleep on the bench, her dress soaked through. For a second, the old panic crossed his face. Trouble in the hall, need at the door, accounts already thin. Then he took off his coat and put it around Mrs. Ansell's shoulders. "The west room is occupied," Margaret said quietly. Nathaniel looked toward the parlor. "Then they can have my bed. Clara and I will manage." Clara, awakened by voices, appeared on the stairs. I watched her face, saw calculation, fatigue, resistance. Then she said, "Peter can sleep with Ruth. The little ones can take his bed. Mrs. Ansell, come upstairs. We will get you dry." No one looked at me for permission. That was when I knew the house had begun to teach without me standing at the board. Later, near dawn, Nathaniel and I sat in the kitchen over coffee too strong for sleep.
"Father would have brought them in," he said. "Yes. Would he be ashamed of me?" I stirred my coffee, though it needed no stirring. "Sometimes." He winced, but nodded. "He would also recognize you," I said. "That may matter more." Nathaniel's eyes reddened. "I was so afraid of being small that I became smaller." It was the first sentence of his I wished to write down. "Then grow," I said. He laughed once, wetly. "At 38? I am learning at 68. He looked toward the stairs where Mrs. Ansell slept under my spare blankets, where Clara had given up her bed without praise, where Ruth and Peter lay crosswise in one room, where the quilt rested folded over the chair because it had been carried from bed to bed all night as comfort required. "Mother," he said. "Yes?" "I am sorry." No explanation followed, no shame dressed as circumstance, no mention of panic, notes, Clara, Whitcomb, St. Anne's, or good intentions. Just sorry. At last. I put my hand over his. His hand was rough now. Freight had done what gentleness never had. "I hear you," I said. Forgiveness did not arrive like music. It did not fill the kitchen with gold light. It came tired, limping, and sat between us with its hands wrapped around coffee, unsure how long it might stay. But it came. Summer made Hallowell smell of dust, hot rails, cut grass, and peaches ripening too fast. The porch boards warmed under bare feet. Boarders complained of mosquitoes. Peter caught frogs in the wash basin until Clara threatened to invoice him for laundry. Ruth planted larkspur and beans in a strip of yard behind the kitchen, and every morning she inspected them with the gravity of a station master. The larkspur bloomed blue in June. "You promised," she said, as if I had personally negotiated with God. So I did. We sat in the yard shelling peas. The railroad star quilt hung on the line after airing, its uneven colors moving in the wind. The indigo corner had been repaired, but I had left one stitch in red thread. A private mark. A reminder that the secret had come out and the cloth had survived.
Ruth watched it. "Will Mercer House be mine someday?" I set a pea pod in the bowl. "It may be, if you want the work and not only the name." "What if I want trains?" "Then want trains." "Girls cannot be conductors." "Not yet." She smiled at the phrase. "Could I keep the house and no trains?" "You may know as much as your head can hold. The world will try to charge rent for space inside you. Refuse." She repeated it softly, perhaps for her notebook. "The world will try to charge rent for space inside you. Refuse." Clara came out with lemonade. She had taken to lemonade after deciding coffee sharpened everyone's temper. She handed me a glass and sat on the back step. "Ruth," she said, "your hem is filthy." Ruth tucked her skirt under her legs. Clara sighed, then looked at the larkspur. "It is a good blue." From Clara, this was a hymn. That afternoon, a letter came from St. Anne's. The envelope bore Mrs. Vale's hand, which I recognized with the weary skill of a woman familiar with unsolicited improvement. I opened it in the parlor, Clara at the desk, Margaret mending by the window. "Dear Mrs. Mercer, the board of St. Anne's Home for Aged Women regrets the misunderstanding of last autumn and wishes to assure you that no place was held without proper expectation of your consent. We further wish to inquire whether Mercer House might recommend women suitable for our sewing employ, as Mrs. Vale has informed us of your connection to several industrious persons." I began to laugh. Clara looked up. "What?" I handed her the letter. She read, then laughed too. Margaret demanded it, read it, and said, "Aged women ask refuge house for workers. World spins. Nobody falls off." We sent them Miss Price's cousin, who needed employment and could sew a seam straighter than a railroad survey. Mrs. Vale stopped speaking to me for 6 weeks, which improved both our spirits. In July, Clara received an invitation to a ladies' luncheon at Mrs. Vale's house and did not know whether to attend. "Go," I said. "Why?" "Because refusing gives them a story. Attending gives you a chair." "You sound like me." I have been listening, against my better judgment. She wore a plain cream dress and no jewelry from Uncle Horace. Before leaving, she stood in the hall smoothing her gloves. "Mrs. Mercer," she said. "Yes." "If anyone speaks of last autumn, ask whether they mean the season when everyone confused my room with public property." Her mouth twitched. "That is too much." "Then use half." She returned 3 hours later with 2 pieces of news. First, Mrs. Vale's sponge cake was dry. Second, 3 women had asked privately whether the Nora Shea Room ever took paying guests who simply needed a week of quiet and no questions. "What did you say?" "I said the lock works." High praise from Margaret's measure. By August, Mercer House had settled into a rhythm no one at the church supper could have imagined. Nathaniel's debt fell below $80. Mr. Whitcomb ceased writing and began nodding stiffly from across the street. Mrs. Vale resumed speaking to me after discovering silence deprived her of information. Dr. Hodge sent 2 patients' wives to us with the solemn confidentiality of a man who had learned something late, but learned it. And I, who had once thought the struggle was simply to remain in my room, discovered staying was not the same as living. For months after the supper, I'd slept with the deed copy beneath my mattress. Not because it was sensible. Mr. Pike had the true papers. But fear is not a lawyer. It does not care where documents are valid. It wants something under the hand at night. One evening, I took the copy out, folded it, and placed it in the desk safe. Then I moved the green chair in my room. This may sound small. It was not. The chair had stood by the east window since Elias died. I had sat there through fevers, bills, thunderstorms, loneliness, and the winter Nathaniel coughed blood and lived. The chair had become less furniture than a post I tied myself to. I moved it to the west window, where the yard and larkspur showed instead of the station. The room changed at once. Not better, not worse. Mine in a new way. That night I slept without the deed beneath me. The second church supper came in October, 1 year after Clara gave my room away. I had considered staying home, not from fear, from distaste. There are rooms where humiliation lingers in the rafters, and one may choose not to dine under it. But Ruth reminded me the roof fund still existed because Methodists repair slowly, and Peter wanted ham. Clara said, carefully, that my pies would be missed. Nathaniel said nothing, which no longer meant the same thing. He waited. So, I baked 3 pies. Apple, pumpkin, and peach preserved from summer. I wore my black silk with the mended cuff, Nora's thimble on a ribbon under my collar where no one could see it, and a bonnet Clara trimmed without asking to replace it. I let her because she did not make it foolish. St. Matthew's Hall looked much the same. Paper garlands, long tables, coffee urn, Mrs. Vale arranging charity like flowers. The difference was that I entered on my own feet and did not sit by the stove. Clara walked beside me carrying the pies. Nathaniel carried Peter's coat and Ruth's basket of rolls. Margaret came too, invited by Ruth and tolerated by society because society had not found a category for her. Dr. Hodge waved from the punch bowl. Mr. Pike stood near the auction table inspecting donated towels as if they were legal briefs. People looked. Of course they did. Some with curiosity, some with disapproval, some with the wary respect given to a kettle that has boiled over once and may do so again.
Mrs. Vale approached in her plum dress. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, "how well you look. How observant you are." Clara made a small cough that might have hidden a laugh. The supper began. Plates passed. Children fidgeted. Men discussed the price of corn. Women discussed women not present. I helped pour coffee until Mrs. Vale, perhaps recalling last year, insisted I need not tire myself. "Mrs. Vale," I said, "if I become tired, I will stop. It is a system I recommend." At the auction, Mr. Pike bought a jar of pickled beets he did not want. Dr. Hodge bought Ruth's basket of rolls and gave them back to Peter, who considered this commerce at its finest. Margaret bought an embroidered towel with a crooked M because she said it looked like it had survived an argument. Then Mrs. Vale rose for announcements. My body remembered before my mind. My shoulders tightened. My fingers found the ribbon under my collar and Nora's thimble there. Clara noticed. She put her hand lightly on my arm.
Not to guide, to stand with. Mrs. Vale cleared her throat.
"Before we conclude, the Ladies' Aid wishes to acknowledge certain charitable efforts in our town which, though unconventional, have brought relief to several deserving women." Unconventional. I nearly smiled. Praise often arrives wrapped in the paper criticism used last. "Mercer House," she continued, "under Mrs. Abigail Mercer's direction, has provided temporary lodging in cases of need. We are grateful for any work that preserves dignity and Christian order." Christian order had been added to protect her from enthusiasm. People clapped, not thunderously, enough. Then Clara stood. I looked at her, startled. She had not told me. For one sharp second I was back in the same hall, same smell of coffee, same public edge. My hand tightened on the thimble. Clara's face was pale, but her voice carried. "Last year in this room, I spoke out of turn about Mrs. Mercer's future." The hall stilled. Nathaniel looked at her as if seeing both the woman he married and someone braver. "I believed I was doing what necessity required," Clara said. "I was wrong. Necessity does not excuse taking another woman's voice, especially in her own house." Mrs. Mercer remained when many of us would have preferred her quiet. Because she remained, Mercer House has become more useful than my plans for it.
Mrs. Vale stared at her napkin. Clara turned slightly toward me. I am sorry, Mother Mercer. Mother Mercer. Not Abigail thrown like a stone, not Mother said for manipulation. Mother Mercer, in public, with no lace around it. Every eye in the room moved to me. I have never enjoyed public emotion. It feels like undressing in a window. But some moments do not belong only to comfort. I stood. The room blurred slightly, not from weakness, from years. I heard you, I said. That was all. It was enough. Clara sat down, shaking. The supper moved again, awkwardly at first, then with relief.
People prefer forgiveness when they do not have to do any themselves. But at our table, something had changed in a way deeper than applause. Nathaniel reached for Clara's hand under the table. She let him take it. Ruth wrote something in her notebook. Peter asked whether apologies meant extra pie. Sometimes, Margaret said, if timed correctly. I looked down the table at my family. Not restored to what it had been, that is a false hope. What breaks does not become unbroken because someone speaks well in public. But a different thing may be made from the pieces, if no one pretends the cracks are decoration. Across the hall, Mrs. Vale began leading a hymn. I did not sing the first verse. My throat was too full. By the second, I joined. My voice was old and not always on pitch. Nora's thimble rested against my heart. The roof still needed $67 because certain institutions are eternal. The coffee was still bad. The rain began again outside, tapping the windows like fingers asking entrance. But this time, when I left St. Matthew's Hall, I did not walk alone in humiliation. I walked between Clara and Ruth, with Nathaniel behind carrying Peter, and Margaret ahead, arguing with Dr. Hodge about whether pickled beets counted as medicine. The mud was just as deep. The road home was just as known. Only I had changed. No, that is not true. I had not changed into someone else. I had returned to someone I had misplaced. Years later, people told the story of the church supper badly. They said my daughter-in-law tried to send me away, and I saved the house with a hidden deed. That was the simple version, and people love simple versions because they fit in a mouth quickly. It was true as far as it went, but it did not go far. The house was not saved by a deed alone. It was saved by Nora's wages, Elias's fear for widows, my late anger, Mr. Pike's ink, Margaret's ledger, Clara's shame, Nathaniel's work, Ruth's memory, and every woman who took the West Room key and slept long enough to remember she was still alive. The deed mattered. Never let anyone tell you papers do not matter. Papers can keep a roof from being stolen by a smile. But paper is only a voice preserved. Someone must still speak when the moment comes. I remained in my front room. The piano never came. Ruth chose a second-hand globe instead and spun it until Peter complained the oceans were dizzy. She grew tall, sharper than was comfortable, and at 16 knew more about railway routes than any clerk who dared dismiss her. Clara tried to make her more graceful. I tried to make her more exact. Margaret taught her to read contracts upside down. Between us, Ruth became difficult in the best way. Peter grew into a kind boy, with molasses priorities and a talent for fixing hinges. He said houses told him where they hurt. I believed him. Nathaniel repaid the debt in full in 1902. He brought the final receipt home on a rainy evening and placed it on the kitchen table. Clara stood beside him. They looked older, both of them, but less hunted. "It is done," he said. I read the receipt, folded it, and handed it back. "Keep it. You do not want it for the account book?" "No." Some things belong to the person who paid them. He put it in Elias's watch case. He had kept the watch wound. Clara never became easy. Neither did I. We argued about curtains, sugar, whether boarders should be allowed second helpings of preserves, Ruth's education, Peter's boots, and the moral character of dust. But when women came to the West Room, Clara's hand was often the first steady one they saw. She could still make charity look severe, but she no longer mistook severity for virtue. Mrs. Vale eventually claimed she had supported Mercer House from the beginning. Margaret said memory was the cheapest donation. I told her to be kind. She said she would consider it in her will. Mr. Whitcomb died in 1905, leaving money to institutions and advice to relatives. Clara attended the funeral in black crepe and came home silent. That night she sat in my room and said, "I am glad he cannot summon me any more." "The dead summon if we keep answering," I said. She looked at me. "Do you answer yours?" I thought of Elias, Nora, the woman I had been at 38, stiff with jealousy in the kitchen. The woman at the church supper, folding a napkin while others decided her fate. "Some," I said, "but not all." In 1908, Margaret married a printer who took her name on the shop sign because Klein and Avery sounded better than Avery alone, and because Margaret insisted truth improved business. She continued Tuesdays and Fridays. Her first daughter was named Nora Abigail, which I called excessive. Margaret said the child would grow into it or fight it, both useful. In 1910, Ruth went to Chicago to study bookkeeping and railway administration through a commercial school that admitted women quietly and took their tuition loudly. Clara cried after the train left. I did not, until I found Ruth's old notebook under the larkspur seed packets. On the first page, grandmother said no. On the second, a house can remember, but paper can speak. On the last page, in a newer, firmer hand, I am not leaving home. I am learning how many tracks lead back. I placed the notebook in the desk safe beside the will. By then, the railroad star quilt had grown thin in places. The brown wool frayed, the red faded. The indigo border held best, Nora's stitches outlasting cloth around them. Every winter I said I would stop using it. Every winter I used it anyway. One February night, when snow pressed against the windows and the freight trains moved like ghosts through white air, Clara came to my room carrying the quilt from the parlor. "You left it downstairs," she said. "Did I?" "Yes." I'd begun to forget small things by then, real things, not salt in apple batter or pantry locks, but names of traveling men, where I set spectacles, whether I'd banked the stove. Age had become less accusation and more weather. This time, no one used it to take my room. Clara simply placed labels on shelves. Ruth wrote from Chicago every Sunday. Peter fixed a bell cord by my bed without discussing institutions, and Nathaniel read the account book aloud when my eyes tired. Clara spread the quilt over me. She smoothed the indigo corner, the one with the red stitch. "I was cruel," she said. It had been 12 years since the supper. "Yes," I said. "You do not soften things. Not when they have already healed crooked." She sat in the chair by the west window, my green chair. The larkspur was gone for winter, but the sticks remained, dark against snow. "Do you ever wish you had sent us away?" "Sometimes." She nodded. "That is fair. Do you ever wish I had gone to St. Anne's?" She looked at the quilt. "No, but there were years when I wished wanting it had not made me visible to myself." That was a Clara sentence. Hard, polished, true. "Being visible is a tax," I said. "You paid it." "So did you." She reached out and tucked the quilt under my feet, a practical tenderness. Then she sat back. Ruth writes that she may have a position with the Illinois Central Office. She wrote me too. Of course she did. Clara tried to sound offended and failed. She says there are men who dislike taking figures from a woman. Then they may enjoy being wrong. Clara smiled. She sounds like you. Poor child. Lucky child, Clara said. The room grew quiet. Downstairs, dishes clinked. Nathaniel coughed in the hall. Peter, now nearly grown, argued with a hinge. The house held all of it. Noise, age, debts paid, apologies partial and complete, women asleep behind locked doors, trains calling beyond the yard. Clara touched the quilt again. Who will have it? She asked. Ruth. Good. But the thimble goes to Margaret's girl. Also good. And the house? She looked at me then, not greedily, not fearfully, simply asking. The house will do what the will says. Ruth may keep it if she wants the work. If not, the trust begins. Mercer Rooms for Women. You know this. I know. She folded her hands. I am glad. Are you? Yes. A faint smile. Do not look so surprised. I have become almost decent through terrible inconvenience. I laughed until I coughed. She brought water and scolded me for laughing in cold air. That night, after she left, I lay under the quilt and listened to the trains. My room was dim. The lamp flame moved softly. The west window showed snow. I thought of the church supper, of rain and mud, of my son looking away. I thought of Nora in her room over the bakery, cursing the priest for stepping on the rug. I thought of Elias writing by lamplight, hiding courage in paper because he had not found enough in speech. I thought of every woman who had slept in the west room and left behind a coin, a note, a hairpin, a better address, or simply the shape of her rest. People imagine dignity as something grand, a speech, a slammed door, a public victory. Sometimes it is. But more often, dignity is a key kept in your own pocket. It is a deed no one can manage for you. It is finishing the coffee before you leave the room. It is admitting you were wrong about a woman who saved you. It is letting an apology enter, but not letting it erase the account. It is a quilt made from scraps nobody thought valuable until winter came. When I finally slept, I dreamed not of St. Anne's, not of Mrs. Vale, not of Mr. Whitcomb or the bank. I dreamed of Nora at the kitchen table, young and sharp-eyed, stitching the indigo border by lamplight. In the dream, I sat across from her.
For once, I did not watch her with suspicion. I watched her hands.
You hide things too well, I told her. She bit the thread with her teeth and smiled. No, Mrs. Mercer, she said. I hide them where only the right woman will look.
When I woke, dawn had just touched the ceiling. The house was quiet before the first train. My hand rested on the red stitch in the quilt's corner. I was old, truly old now. No defiance could make my knees young or my eyes clear. Someday, not that day, but someday, I would leave Mercer House by a door I did not return through. No will prevents mortality. No deed argues with God. But I would not leave as a parcel. I would not leave because a room had become useful to someone else. I would leave having been heard. And downstairs, in the desk safe, ink waited longer than breath. Ruth would know, Margaret would know, Clara would know. The house would know. At 7, the passenger train whistled east of town.
The sound entered my room, low and familiar, and moved through the quilt, the floorboards, the walls, the old sign above the porch. Mercer House. Clean rooms, hot meals, near depot. And because a woman named Nora Shea once stitched a promise into indigo cloth, Because an old widow finished her coffee and stood up in the rain. Because shame was written down and not allowed to rule in silence. A working lock, a kept key. A room for those who still needed to remember they were not finished.